This podcast is sponsored by Phaselaw. Picture this: a data subject access request has just landed on your desk. You've got 30 days to go through 40,000 documents across email, Slack, and 3 shared drives. And your review process is Adobe Acrobat and a lot of coffee. Sound familiar? That's the problem Phaselaw solves. It's the platform purpose built for document disclosures, subject access requests, FOI, the lot. So instead of redacting PDFs one by one or forcing litigation software to do a job it wasn't designed for, with Phaselaw, you get collection, review, and redaction in one workflow built around the 1 month clock. Teams across EMEA are using it to cut response times from weeks to days. And for Guardians of Data listeners, Phaselaw is offering a 2-month free trial. Run it on live requests, see what it does to your backlog, and decide from there. No card, no commitment. Head to phase.law/guardians to claim your free trial. That's phase.law/guardians. Welcome to Guardians of Data, the show where we explore the world of information law and information governance, from privacy and AI to cybersecurity and freedom of information. I'm Ibrahim Hassan. In each episode, we'll be speaking with experts and practitioners to unpack the big issues shaping the IG profession. Artificial intelligence is no longer something organizations are experimenting with. It's embedded in platforms, products, and decision-making systems that affect millions of people in real time. Over the past few months, one AI tool in particular has forced regulators, boards, and governance professionals to stop and take notice. Grok, the AI chatbot developed by XAI and integrated into the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, has become the center of an international controversy. Concerns about Grok first surfaced in May 2025, with users prompting it to alter photos of real women to show them wearing bikinis, lingerie, or in transparent clothing or suggestive poses. By late December 2025, the trend escalated dramatically. Users simply replied to public photos with requests like "put her in a bikini" or "remove her clothes," and Grok publicly posted the generated images, making them highly visible and viral through retweets. The issue exploded last month with nearly 200,000 daily requests made to Grok for such images. Estimates indicate it generated and posted 4.4 million images in 9 days, with 41 to 65% of these photos sexualized, according to analysis by the New York Times. The public posting amplified harm, turning Grok into what critics described as an industrial-scale tool for non-consensual pornography and harassment. The global backlash against Grok was swift and intense. Governments condemned it, and in the UK, Ofcom and the Information Commissioner's Office launched investigations. The EU has begun a probe under the Digital Services Act, and some countries have temporarily blocked Grok. Victims, including public figures, have spoken out amid rising class action lawsuits, particularly in the United States. XAI has responded by restricting Grok's features, banning edits of real people into revealing clothing, and adding other safeguards. This isn't just another tech scandal, it's a governance case study. It raises fundamental questions about how powerful AI systems are designed and overseen, and about whether existing laws and board-level oversight are keeping pace. To help us unpack these issues, I'm joined by Lynn Wyeth, an expert in AI, data protection, and responsible technology. She's the former head of the Information Governance Function and Data Protection Officer of a large unitary public authority and the author of Data Protection Compliance in Practice. Let's get started. Hello, Lynn. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ibrahim.
This is a subject which is very much in the news at the moment, so I'm hoping you're going to be shedding a lot of light on this issue. For listeners who haven't followed this closely, What is Grok and what triggered this controversy?
Okay, so Grok is basically the AI companion on X. So Elon Musk's social media platform that used to be called Twitter has created an AI part to it where you can talk to basically artificial intelligence. You can, formerly we used to say tweet, didn't we? Tweet it and ask it questions and it will answer you. So it's kind of like a glorified chatbot, isn't it? A virtual assistant. It's been around since about November 2023 as a direct competitor really to ChatGPT, which was one of the first AIs that I think a lot of people started using for free on the internet. And the whole point, according to Elon Musk, is that it provides real-time, unfiltered responses with at times a rebellious or humorous tone. So he wants Grok to kind of have its own personality, so people really do think they're talking to a person rather than a computer.
So, an honest, plain talking, free speech loving chatbot. Sounds wonderful. So, what went wrong, Lynn?
Well, it does, doesn't it? It's great. It's kind of like, rather than just doing a bit of a boring Google, you could just ask the computer, it'll chat back to you and you can continue asking it different questions and almost have a conversation with it. Unfortunately, Grok, being like a real person, is obviously constantly learning, constantly doing things that real people do. And as we know, people are not always the nicest things on the planet. So it's been gobbling up everything it can from the internet. And then you get some bright spark, of course, who says, hey, put this woman in a bikini. And Grok goes, okay, and changes the photo of that individual, takes their clothes off them and puts them in a bikini. People pretty quickly cottoned on to having a bit of fun with this and did some funny images, but then it took a bit of a nasty turn. As is always the way, some human beings decided that they would try and make people naked, they would try and sexualize images. So you ended up with a spate of quite awful, distressing images of people. And for those people that it was happening to, this wasn't very nice, was it? A photo of them on the internet has been taken and reimagined, really, of them practically naked, covered in what they were calling donut glaze to make them look like they'd been having sexual relations with somebody, and it was really quite distressing to those people. And of course, the majority of them at the start were women.
And if this technology is being used in this way, then it makes you think, well, what should we put up online?
Absolutely. And I think the real difference with Grok and X was that it's doing it live on the internet. Everybody else's AI modules that people are using, like ChatGPT, etc., you're tending to do it in your own account or on your own laptops. Whereas Grok is very much doing it in real time, live on the internet. It's producing that image straight away for the world to see with no filter and nobody going, "Oh, that's not appropriate. I shouldn't post that." So what we're seeing is Grok really mirroring what Elon Musk thinks is okay to put out on the internet because of his obsession with freedom of speech.
One point that you made, which pricked my ears, was the fact that the difference here being Grok does what the individual wants them to do, put somebody in a bikini or tight underwear or something, but then automatically, or very quickly, the individual can post that on the internet. Whereas with ChatGPT, they would have to export that image before they can publicize it.
Grok just posts it as an answer. And yeah, there's none of that sanity check or that filter or a human going, oh, maybe not. That doesn't seem appropriate because Grok doesn't necessarily have that check yet. It hasn't learnt enough about what's okay in normal society. But of course, what is acceptable? What's acceptable to me is clearly very different to what's acceptable to Elon Musk, unfortunately. We all have very different values and expectations, don't we? And, he posted people were doing pictures of him in a bikini and he thought it was funny. And it's like, well, that's fine, Elon. You do think that's funny. But for a woman, it's not funny if you're abused in that way. So in theory, it's about free speech on X, etc. And in theory, that should mean everything's on there, but we all know that there are biases. We know that they control the algorithm. So is it really free or are they bombarding us with certain things? If you look at the suggestions of who to follow and what to read, my stream is just a bunch of right wing nonsense. Now, whether that means everybody on X is posting that sort of stuff, I don't know. Or is it targeting me with that to try and change my mind?
Let's now turn to the UK government's reaction to this controversy. The Technology Secretary, Liz Kendall, said in a statement, and I quote, "We are in the coming weeks bringing into force powers to criminalize the creation of intimate images without consent. I expect all platforms to abide by Ofcom's new violence against women and girls guidance. And if they do not, I am prepared to go further. We are as determined to ensure women and girls are safe online as we are to ensure they are safe in the real world. No excuses." End quote. Now, some countries, Lynn, for example, Malaysia and Indonesia, have reacted to this controversy by blocking access to Grok entirely. Is that likely to happen in the UK? Is there a political will to take on X and Elon Musk?
I don't think so, Ibrahim, to be honest. I mean, Starmer's popularity is at an all time low. I don't think he needs to do anything else to pee off the majority of the country that uses social media. I think, they can threaten and then Elon backs down a little bit, doesn't he? Elon goes off on X ranting about freedom of speech and, we won't be tamed and all that kind of stuff. And then a few days later, you kind of see in the small print in the press, oh, X have slightly tweaked things in the UK to meet their rules. So I think they've probably done enough to stop the really bad stuff happening. I don't know whether you know, but when it was first launched, Grok had a spicy mode. They actually designed it for the more sexually explicit creations that people wanted. And the problem was they failed to moderate that on the public platform. Well, it failed to moderate itself. It was doing spicy mode everywhere.
Re-
And because of that, we literally saw potentially those sexualized images of women and more worryingly children. I think we saw the Centre for Countering Digital Hate give some stats where they thought there were about 3 million sexualized images made, and out of that, 23,000 were children. That's not all right. Absolutely, the government need to act about that sort of thing. Starmer said it was disgusting and shameful. We've seen other countries react to it, etc. Liz Kendall has said she'll take action. I think, Ofcom and the Information Commissioner's Office both started to launch investigations straight away. And because of that, X immediately went, ooh, yeah, we're doing something about it. They introduced measures to prevent the Grok account from allowing the editing of images of real people in revealing clothing. And, that to me is a really interesting one. It's going to stop editing the images of real people. How do you know what's a real person and what's an AI image anymore? Everything you see on the internet now, you've got to go, is that AI generated? And it has become so easy for people to do stuff. People have been
Right.
manipulating photos for years, decades. Anybody that knows how to use Photoshop could do this to people many, many years ago. The problem is, it has now become simple to do for absolutely anybody. I can do it by just talking to my computer.
Do you remember a few years ago, Kate was in the news because she had used Photoshop and not very well and created some extra fingers and some things that weren't aligned. Well, now with AI, it'll do it automatically. Is this best understood as a technology failure, Lynn, or is it a governance failure, or is it a regulatory gap?
I think there's a bit of all of the above on that one. If that was a multiple choice question, I'd go for D, all of the above. we can't keep up with the technology. And anybody that works in data protection and privacy, etc., knows that we are constantly rewriting legislation, sometimes decades too late, to keep up with how technology moves. And boy, has technology moved in the last few years. GDPR tried to modernize it, tried to take into account profiling, that kind of stuff. And then along comes AI, and suddenly, it's almost updating on a daily basis. How on earth can legislation keep up with that? So we've got technology with people using it without thinking about how to use it safely and putting in those safeguards that should be in there with some of the laws that we have, not doing their DPIAs properly. I'm sure we'll come on to that later in the conversation. You've got the governance failure with legislation struggling to keep up. And I think most importantly, our lawmakers not understanding the technology. If you've seen the news today, it's all over the internet again today how the government intend to ban this and ban that, and they'll even ban VPNs so you can't get onto these AI chatbots. And they just don't get how technology works and how people will just go around it. And the regulatory gap, well, how many of our regulators seem particularly toothless, especially in the UK? I think anybody in data protection is constantly kind of disappointed with our regulatory action. You see some of the other data protection regulators, for example, across the EU giving out fines for this, that, and the other, and ours doesn't. We launch investigations, we make bland statements on the website, and then there's very little action, unfortunately.
Can you remind us what the government is considering in terms of regulating this area? At the moment, we've got laws which say that it's illegal to share deep fakes, but it's not illegal to create a deep fake, particularly a
Yeah.
sexualized one. What's happening in the future?
So the Data Use and Access Act is started having bits switched on, and they're hoping to bring some stuff in through that and through the crime and policing bill, etc., to make it that if you create this stuff or ask for it to be created, that would be an offence too. I mean, I don't think most people even know that sharing it is an offence. There needs to be an awful lot of education done, I think. We've got so many different laws in this country and then so many different laws around the world because, we have to remember that the X is not just operating in the UK, it's trying to build a platform that will work in different territories without too much tweaking. So it's very complex when you've got all the different legislation across the world. The EU have got their Digital Services Act that's potentially being breached. We've got, our Online Safety Act. We need to look at UK GDPR in a bit more detail and see what's going on there. You've got your human rights stuff where you've got that right of freedom to expression, etc. Balancing those rights out with some of the other legislation that we've got and I saw a wonderful phrase on the internet last week, lawful but awful content. We've got to really drill down into has the law been broken or do we just not like this? And then we get into the ethical dilemma of everything, don't we?
A very interesting phrase, lawful but awful. Just focusing on that a little bit more and what I pointed to earlier with regards to images which are not in themselves sexualized. They're not illegal in any way at the moment, yet they are upsetting to the person who is the subject of the image. I was just listening to a recording of Women's Hour this morning where they were talking about this subject, and they had a university lecturer on whose image had been changed. Partly because she had disagreed with somebody on a bulletin board about a professional issue. Somebody else piled in and they changed their image, not in a sexualized way, but it was still something that took control over their image and posted it back to them. So for them, it was upsetting. If somebody put some hair on me, I suppose I wouldn't be upset. But if they changed the color of my hair, they took my beard off, for example, and they made it as part of an image and a message to upset me. It seems as though the law doesn't actually address that. Do you think, particularly considering what the government has said about ending violence and harassment of women and girls, that kind of image manipulation should be made illegal?
That's where it gets really difficult, doesn't it? Because there's laws in place for things like harassment. If you genuinely feel that someone's harassing you, but it's subjective, isn't it? What's that threshold? When is it just causing someone a little bit of upset and they're not happy about it or they're embarrassed? When does it trip over into causing real damage and distress that you could potentially claim against? When is it really harassment? How often has it been going on? I think that's where we're so fluffy and fuzzy that we don't know. And if you're not careful, You're going to have the police absolutely bogged down in people reporting every single post on X going, well, that upset me. I didn't like that, what they said about me. That would never work, would it? So we need to have some really clear definitions and thresholds, I think, if we're going down the people are upset route. More interestingly for me, it's about, well, who's got the rights to those photos? We've kind of come to this belief in the world that the minute we put something on the internet, it's fair game and it's our own fault then. But who's got the copyright to the photo? Who's got intellectual property? Why are we allowing people to do this with our images? You mentioned about losing control, Ibrahim, but remember, we really never have that control, do we? Because we're not the data controllers. People think it's their data, and it's like, oh no, no, it's not. Someone else is the data controller. And what rights have we signed away when we've created an X account or a Facebook account in those terms and conditions? Maybe that needs looking at about what control we should really have on our image.
And of course, that's a much wider debate, isn't it, with
Yeah.
regards to copyright, and perhaps copyright can be used in
Yeah.
order to control the dissemination of altered images. Copyright and AI, that's an issue that I'll probably touch upon with Elton John and Dua Lipa and Paul McCartney when they come on this podcast. Then
We mentioned about the provisions that are going to come in, so the doer is going to criminalize the creation or request of non-consensual intimate images. What's intimate mean? It's law, isn't it? It's always subject to interpretation. What one person might think is intimate, another might not. What's that definition? So, yeah, we need to be really clear what we mean by that so people do know what their rights are and when they can complain. And I think the police could get really busy quite quickly.
yes, and there's a again balance to be struck, isn't there? We do believe in free speech, and we don't want to be in a situation where, as you say, somebody's posted something, and next thing you know, they get a knock on the door from the police, and it's like you've upset somebody. Well, you mentioned data controllers, and you use some data protection terminology, and of course, that's
Mm.
our thing. So let's get into the Information Commissioner's investigation. What are the issues that they will be looking at from a GDPR perspective?
Okay, so I guess the real issue that is a bit of a knotty question is AI generated imagery personal data? If they've altered that picture, but it's still clearly you, is that your personal data? It's infers that it's you. You can identify me from it, etc. Probably is. Is there any consent based processing? Probably not. And that's what I think the ICO really need to drill down into here. Our principle one, our absolute basic principle. What's the lawful basis that this is all happening, and is it being done fairly and transparently? What appropriate safeguards might have been built into the design to stop any harmful images, because that wouldn't be fair. It might be lawful, they might have it in their terms and conditions, and it might be our contract condition. It might be their legitimate interest that they're using. It's definitely not consent. But for me, it's this second part of principle one. And it's where we think about some of the ethics, I think. That there's some data protection practitioners that will say it doesn't talk about ethics anywhere in GDPR. But principle one talks about whether it's fair and transparent. And for me, that's where that kicks in. Is this what people expect? Do they think you're dealing with their data fairly or not? Why has the ICO suddenly gone after X on this when lots of people have been doing this for years on other platforms? It is because it was very visible, very public, hit the press, etc., etc. They had to look like they were potentially taking some action. But yeah, they're going to have some interesting discussions, I think, about those principle one arguments.
Yep, some great essay questions perhaps for data protection exams. Is an AI generated image personal data? As you say, it is about living identifiable individuals. And does it relate to a person? I suppose it does. So
Mhm.
maybe they won't have so much of an issue there, but it's a question of how much the image has been manipulated. I suppose if it's been manipulated where the individual is no longer identifiable, there's little purpose to it. But interesting point you made about legal basis, and you mentioned legitimate interest, and of course, a legitimate interest normally requires that balancing exercise. Is
Yeah.
it the interest of the individual or somebody else, and how does it impact the rights and freedoms of individuals? And that's where some of the laws you mentioned previously, particularly
Mm.
privacy, human rights, but also other laws such as harassment and everything else, equality laws will come into the mix. So yeah, that's going to be really interesting. And I hadn't thought about your second point, which was the fairness and where ethics comes in. Even if somebody can make an argument that it's lawful, is it actually fair and is it ethical? So I think the commissioner is going to have their work cut out, and whichever way they go, it's going to be a controversial decision, isn't it?
It is, definitely. 'Cause somewhat interestingly, I got an update from OpenAI yesterday who do ChatGPT saying that they'd updated some information. I went and reread their privacy notice to see what their lawful basis was for ChatGPT. They'd spelled out where it is because of terms and conditions in the contracts and where it's legitimate interest. And yeah, have they done their legitimate interest test? Is my question for X. I'm sure there isn't a DPIA for Grok, but you never know.
And you mentioned data protection by design, and it'll be
Mm.
interesting again what the commissioner decides on that. Lynn, is it not worrying as a practitioner and if I may say so, a woman that we are still talking about technology being used for abuse? It's still making the headlines, and of course, in the background to all this, we've got the Epstein scandal, but that was what was going on 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. And here and now, we're talking about new technologies which were supposed to be making our lives easier, helping us save money for the public purse, making us more efficient. And here we are talking about how it's being used to perpetrate or abuse of women and girls.
I think it's just a continuation of decades of the same, really, Ibrahim. You know, as a woman, it is obviously very disappointing that we don't seem to have particularly moved on, but it isn't surprising, unfortunately. It's no different to what the newspapers did in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you know, peddling hate towards migrants for years. The old page 3 girls, you know, there's always been that racism and misogyny there to sell in some way. It's capitalism, it's greed. And now we've just changed the medium that we're doing it in. It's not old paper copies anymore. We've moved on to the internet and now it's about clickbait and it's about getting likes and it's about, you know, data as an asset. And this stuff sells, unfortunately, which is pretty disappointing. And it just reflects society and we haven't moved on.
Interesting. You've linked it back to what was happening in the 80s and 90s with the print media. And I was reading that X's initial response was to limit the feature to premium users so that people who are paying for this service, they were getting first dibs and monetizing again misogyny and abuse. So it's just using new technology for the same old thing. Having said all that, Lynn, we've talked about the ethical issues, we've talked about the legal issues, we've talked about the wider moral issues. A number of organizations recently have left X. So I was reading about Belfast City Council, Queen's University, Belfast, Sport England. But I suppose all organizations need to think very carefully as to whether these platforms are aligning with their own values and principles.
Yes, I think they do. Everybody's going to make their own decision, aren't they? I've thought a couple of times about using it a lot less, and then there's been something quite useful on it because there are still good people on there as well as the bad and as well as Grok. You know, if you're running a business, if you're running an organization that needs to get your message out there, social media is probably a really vital tool still at the moment. And you've got to balance that with what are your red lines? When does it cross that red line for our organization ethically and morally to say we're not gonna, you know, be on here anymore. We're not gonna support this organization. So I think it's very much down to individuals. I know friends, I know organizations and groups that have left X. You know, I myself set up an alternative account on Blue Sky and some people on Threads and that kind of thing. You know, uh, some of them are much of a muchness with the, you know, one man evil dictator type guy at the top. So it's up to individuals, I think, to weigh up those ethical dilemmas.
Let's zoom out a little bit for this section and talk about the practical and board relevant lessons that we can learn from this controversy. What does it tell us about deploying powerful AI tools within an organization?
And just do your homework before you roll it out. Have a good look at the legislation that could potentially impact on what you've deployed. Where could it go wrong? And, there's a really simple answer for this. It is do a data protection impact assessment and do it well and do it properly and be honest about it and think about those ethical issues as well as the legal issues within your data protection impact assessment. Yeah, any organization that gets that DPIA right will hopefully be able to roll something out lawfully and that doesn't upset people.
The problem, Lynn, is that, as we know, and you've worked in the public sector for over 30 years, departments that are implementing these new technologies don't always come to the information governance team until they've already deployed.
It's the classic, isn't it? We've done this. Is it okay? No, no, it's not, but it's too late, isn't it? Organizations have really, really got to work hard at getting these things embedded early on so people address these issues.
And what's your view in terms of AI oversight? Where should it sit? Should it be in the tech
It
team, the legal team?
It is a really difficult one, isn't it? We argued about this when it first started coming in at Leicester. They wanted to put it with data protection, and I went, "Oh, it's way more than data protection. What about all the techie stuff? What do I know about that?" It's a joint effort. It cannot just be sitting in one team because it does address an awful lot of different legislative issues, not just data protection, but other laws as well that we've talked about today. It is technology, you need people to understand how it works and keep on top of the development of it. You need people at the high level, the board level to understand it. How many of those sit there and have no idea what AI is and how it works? Someone needs to be teaching them about it as well if the organization is going to make a decision on using it. So it's really got to be a joint effort. Yes, it's got to be an umbrella. It'll have to sit in a team somewhere, but it really needs a board of people put together to deal with it.
Finally, Lynn, with all these stories about AI misuse, AI going rogue, do you think AI has lost its way? Are you going to do what recently I was reading about one a famous AI expert who's decided to give it all up and study poetry?
No, I'm definitely not going to study poetry in my retirement. I think AI is here for good. The genie is out of the bottle. You cannot put it back. Even if you regulate it to death, it's going to be out there. We need to learn to use it and harness it and use it effectively and safely. And some regulation might be needed to help enforce that. It can do some amazing things. It will save lives. Unfortunately, it will also cause a lot of harm as well. I do worry that it will take over and it will be like a science fiction movie, but hopefully we can get a handle on it and use it for benefit. It can save people so much time at work. I use it quite effectively in some of my sort of like analysis of data to create reports, and it saves me hours and hours. And, not using personal data, hopefully not harming anybody anywhere. So there's lots of good stuff that it can be used for, and I don't think it's gonna go away anytime soon.
And finally, as a big Eurovision fan, Lynn, if I were to do a podcast with a famous musician, then I'm going to be inviting you to talk about the copyright and the AI and the governance issues. Who would you like me to feature?
Oh, you should get Lordy in, definitely.
Might be a bit loud.
But I mean, AI is really interesting in the arts, isn't it, as well? How it's writing songs and writing books and doing voiceovers, and we've got writers and artists and musicians and songwriters all losing work because of it already. How is that okay?
How long do you think it will be before we get the first winner of Eurovision not being a real person, but AI generated?
I don't think an AI person can enter under the rules at the moment, but I'm not sure whether it says anything about the song being written by AI. So that could get interesting.
There you go. Let's wait and see. It's been a fascinating conversation, and no doubt we're going to be returning to this sometime soon. So, whether it's Robbie Williams or Paul McCartney or Elton John or Lordi, I will definitely be inviting you. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me on, Ibrahim.
That's all for today's episode of Guardians of Data. Today's discussion shows that the Grok controversy isn't just about one AI system or one company. It's about how law, ethics, power, and politics intersect when we deploy AI and what happens when safeguards lag behind capability. For data protection, AI, and technology leaders, the message from regulators like the ICO is becoming clear. Responsibility doesn't start after harm occurs, it starts at design, at deployment, and at the moment decisions are made about what should and shouldn't be built at all. If you found today's discussion useful, please subscribe, share this podcast with colleagues, and leave us a review. And remember, whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out in information governance, there's always more to learn, and we'll be here to help you stay ahead of the curve. Thanks for listening, and join us next time on Guardians of Data. This podcast is sponsored by Phaselaw. Phaselaw is purpose built for document disclosures like subject access requests and FOI requests. Instead of redacting PDFs one by one or forcing litigation software to do a job it wasn't designed for, with Phaselaw you get collection, review, and redaction in one workflow. Teams across the world are using it to cut response times from weeks to days. And for Guardians of Data listeners, Phaselaw is offering a 2-month free trial. Run it on live requests, see what it does to your backlog, decide from there. No card, no commitment. Head to phase.law/guardians to claim your free trial. That's phase.law/guardians.